Good evening and welcome to SLA Europe's webinar supporting your organization's post-COVID-19 response with information and insight. While we're waiting for the last few to join us, I want to mention that part of our spring program was an outreach initiative to be held at the Half Moon Theatre in London. This was unfortunately cancelled due to the pandemic. The organization focuses on giving young people who would otherwise often feel excluded from arts activities opportunities to join the world of theatre. However, the Half Moon is, like so many other cultural institutions, in need of help, so any donations would be gratefully appreciated. A donation link will be shared on the Padlet and in the chat, where the Padlet link can also be found. Oliver has a strong background in information-based decision-making. He's also the owner of the business research company, who were kind enough to sponsor our winter warmer quiz this year. So thank you very much for this, Oliver. Tonight's presentation will focus on support of organizations post-COVID-19 response using information and insight. And as always, questions and comments will be much appreciated. You can either use the question box in GoToWebinar or join the Padlet platform. Please welcome Oliver.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for the kind introduction. So as Catherine said, my name is Oliver. I'm somebody who's been working in research for many years. I thought this might be a good time to talk to people about how easy ways or fairly easy ways that you can that people can do research and help their organizations at a time when obviously things have changed a lot and are continuing to change very quickly. So organizations are particularly keen, I think, to get information, to understand what's going on in their environment, in their market at the moment. What I wanted to present to you was some relatively easy wins that you can use in order to help your organization with more information, which can then feed into their strategy and help them to respond to, and that goes across the kind of strategy of the organization, right from assessing what areas they want to operate in, which markets they want to operate in, looking at their competitors and organizations around them and what they're doing, learning from them, but also looking at ways to do even better than them, looking at information on their customers, their users, trying to understand more about them and what's happening to them during this time of change, and also feeding into the products and the services that your organizations develop and deliver. So right across the kind of spectrum of business planning and business change, trying to help give you some suggestions on some ways that you can gather information to feed into that process and that decision making at a time when those decisions may need to be made faster and in a more decisive manner than perhaps at other times because of the speed of change. In terms of the structure for the discussion, we're going to start off looking at the different types of business research that you can do. I talk here about business research. I think primarily we're talking, it is more focused on the private sector, but hopefully those of you working in the public sector will also, there should be information here or techniques here which are useful for you too. Looking at sources for business research, and looking at the two so there are multiple types of business research approaches, and here we're really going to be focusing in on internet research, because this is the fastest and most cost-effective type of research. It's the kind that's also most easily and appropriate in the current circumstances. So in this discussion, I'm going to be talking about how to develop and improve, or do internet research as effectively as possible. But I'll also just highlight the other types of research that exist. Then in terms of internet research, there's going to be essentially two parts. One of them is going to look at open search techniques. This would be the shorter part. The first part, where I'll quickly look at essentially at Google and techniques for using Google more effectively, as effectively as possible, to improve your research findings. And then the second part of the discussion will be looking at different sources, specific types of sources of information that you can use when you're for different types of research. And we're going to look at 4 types there. They're some of the biggest and most important types of research that one would do in developing a business strategy. So that would be market sizing and identifying sort of market opportunity, customer information, so finding researching information on your customers, competitor information, finding out information about customers, and product and pricing information relating to developing your products and pricing them correctly, etc. And then lastly, I'll suggest some other sources of information. So to understand sort of the context of the type of research that we're talking about here, we're looking at internet research, and I'm going to try and restrict most of the sources and techniques that I'm talking about to free or very low cost research. Some of the sources that I'll suggest are more expensive if you decide to go and subscribe to them and get the full services, etc. But everything I'm going to mention has got is either free or has at least got some kind of introductory free offering within it to allow you to get some information to get started. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today, which is secondary and internet research for your organization. But it's worth just contextualizing that with the other main sources of information that should be informing your organization strategy. But all 3 of these are somewhat harder to do currently at the time of COVID and lockdown in many countries. So you've got human intelligence is obviously one of the key inputs into company strategies in terms of market research. Still going on, but obviously more restricted at the moment. The biggest part of that type of work is consumer research, whether it's qualitative research or quantitative research. In this case, some of that is continuing to go on online, but a lot of it has slowed down, so it's harder to do. Anyway, it tends to be a major exercise and quite an expensive exercise. Then there's expert interviews, mystery shopping, etc. So these are all types of research related to speaking to people, and they're a vital part of one's research that a company can do, and techniques that a researcher should know but it's not what we're focusing on today, and indeed it's harder to do at the moment. Another type of research is research by observation. So that could be literally going and looking, say, at a factory or at a shop to see who is coming and going and what are the quantities of materials coming and going. There's a lot of this kind of work being done at the moment, some of it through drones and that kind of thing. So that's a or it could be social media listening, media monitoring. So it's essentially tracking what's going on and keeping tabs on it and looking, observing what's happening, normally over a time scale. So that's another type of research. Again, very important, but not what we're looking at today. And then there's also internal research sources, so utilizing your own company's data. So that could be big data in terms of transaction information, or it could be, you know, knowledge that's handed over from your sales team or your marketing team, etc., or even your procurement teams that can help your organization understand its position in the marketplace. And so that's a very important thing. Again, there are some challenges with doing that at the moment in terms of the lack of personal contact or physical contact, I suppose you would say, close interaction, but still a very important part of the research process, but not what we're focusing on today. So today we're focusing on secondary and internet research related to the market. So to quickly talk about how to search effectively on Google. So the Google is the when you tell people that you're a sort of information research professional, people tend to say, well, I don't understand what your job is. All you need to do is search on Google. Well, there's two things there. First of all, that's not the case. In order to do internet search effectively, what one really needs to do is find the boxes, where the information is, the key sources of information, and then delve into them. Simply doing everything through Google isn't enough. But secondly, even within Google, there are better and worse ways of searching. And so I'm going to quickly run through some of the key features of Google that you can use to improve the way that you search there, and then move on to some of these key sources for secondary research, for different types of secondary research. So the first thing we'd say about using Google is to use search strings, so Google will respond much better to a string of related types of information, pointing it towards what you're looking for, than to individual phrases, individual words. So a good structure is to think about the target piece of information, the name of the target piece of information you're looking at, the type of that information that you're looking for, and then the geography within which you want to find out the information. So let's say examples here would be, I want to find out about models of SUVs in France, mobile phone market size in Spain, or wine companies in Italy. So first, the piece of information you want, secondly, the type of information you want, and lastly, the geography that you want it for. So next, if we look at ways of using Google, one of the most important is there are lots of different ways of controlling the way that Google searches, and you in the past you kind of had to learn a load of symbols and shortcuts in order to do that. I think the easiest way now is definitely to use the advanced search tool. So you'll see at the bottom right hand side below the search box on Google, there are options or settings, I think it's called, and within that there is advanced search, and that is something that anyone who is serious about using Google effectively should be using. So the first things or options that it gives you is whether to 3 different types of searches. You can search for all these words, this exact word or phrase, or any of these words. Now, I would say that for a normal business researcher, commercial researcher, you would probably be much more likely to be using the first 2 of those, and to work from the exact phrase to all of these words. Any of these words is unlikely to be relevant because it's too loose and too general. So I would normally start with an exact word, exact phrase search, and then if I'm finding that I'm not getting enough results there, I would move to all of these words search. So essentially with Google, because of the sheer number of responses that you're likely to get, we're always looking at ways to refine and make the results as relevant as possible, and then we can always broaden out if we find that we have too few responses, but almost always we have huge numbers of responses, and the issue is the relevance of those responses. You can also use the none of these words function. That's particularly helpful if you've got an ambiguous term in your search that that's giving forced responses or responses that are nothing to do with what you're interested in. So, for example, if you're searching for different models of car and you're finding that you're getting lots of supermodels coming up, you could say none of, remove supermodels. Another very key thing is region and language. So if you're looking for information in a foreign country, or even in the UK, or wherever you are, even in your own country, so you can just select region within advanced search. You can also just enter google.co.uk instead of .com, but it's easier to do it this way and it's more consistent. So choose the region. If you're looking for information in France, you can do Google searches saying, so, market name in France, but also try the French Google, or let's say the Australian Google is the first, for Australia. That would be, it will give more relevant information, more relevant results than just putting the word Australia into your search terms. And then if you, if it's a country with a different language, you can, and you're doing serious research and want to get detail, you're probably going to have to translate your key search terms into the local language and do some searching in the local language and use Google Translate to quickly flip between the languages. Even though that's quite hard work, it's much more effective than just searching google.com in English. You won't get, you will miss a huge amount if you do that. You can restrict by time, so avoid lots of out-of-date information. Terms appearing is another way that you can really make your searches tighter and more relevant, and you can restrict it to the page title. You can restrict it to the metadata, the hidden code that's behind the page, or you can do the normal search that goes across the text. So again, try the more restricted searches, try the title searches, and then move outwards if you're not getting enough content. But start off with something as tight as possible so that you don't waste time on huge amounts of irrelevant material. You can select file type, so you can choose Excel, PowerPoint, etc. So for example, if you're really looking for heavy data information, it can be useful to search for Excel. If you're looking for a slide or a visualization, PowerPoint, etc. Another thing on that is that whatever the search you do, you're going to get the first page of search results, and then you have the option of choosing images. It's always worth, even when you're doing sort of fairly heavy research, it's always worth checking the images, because quite often you'll get some charts and data coming up in the images which is not immediately apparent in the text search. I mentioned the stuff about local language and key phrases. One additional point is use of incognito mode or private window. So Google obviously uses cookies, etc., to make your search results as relevant to you as possible. So if I do a search, it's going to be different from your search. If we do exactly the same search, the results that come up are going to be slightly different. If you use incognito mode or private window, which are options on the top right-hand side of the screen, it will reduce the impact of that kind of bias. If you want to completely remove that kind of bias, you can use a platform such as DuckDuckGo, which doesn't use any cookies or any bias in the results. However, it's not as good a search engine as Google, so probably a combination of those two approaches is the best one. But the main thing I wanted to talk about for the next 15 minutes or so is some of the key resources that you can use, the kind of boxes within which information sits on the internet. And knowing those, or having some idea of those, and developing them and developing your set of them is what helps you to become a really strong researcher. So I've grouped them into a number of types. Sources, the types of sources that you might use for when you're trying to find about the market size or the opportunity in a particular market. The types of sources you might use if you're trying to find out about customers. The types of source you might use if you're trying to find out about your competitors, and the types of source you might use when you're trying to find out about product and pricing. So we'll start off with market sizing. So how do you find out about market information on the internet without spending a huge amount of money? So there are a number of different types of sources. One is one good source is professional services companies. So you could look any of the big professional services companies, Bain, McKinsey, Accenture, etc. They all produce quite a lot of research by sector on what's going on in those sectors, and it's free, and it's basically used as a loss leader for them to attract customers for their higher value services or their high value services. So you just put in the name of any of those big companies, and then research or analysis, and then you'll take them. They all have specific tools, and you can look for information in your sector. It'll tend to be quite high level. It won't necessarily be in your niche of the market or your particular area, but it's often they've done some polling, quite up-to-date polling of senior executives in that area, which can be interesting. So that is a good source, good place to look. So import-export trade bodies. So most governments support their companies within those countries, or exporters, particularly when they've got ambitions to go into other countries, by trying to give them some information about what opportunities lie in different countries. And most big countries provide some kind of service of that type. The US has a huge one, which is very good. The Japanese one is called JETRO. There's a Canadian one, and all of them produce information about other countries, which is designed to help their enterprises take opportunities in different markets and different geographies. So that can be a really good source of information, of free information about what's happening in different markets. National statistics organizations. So we're moving now more from sort of trends and what's going on in the markets to hard data. National statistics organizations are the kind of daddy of data at a country level. Everybody's got one. The UK is called the Office of National Statistics. The American one is the Bureau of Economics, I think, BEA, and every country has got one, and they can have very detailed information about the size of markets and their growth. The tricky bit there is making all that information, understanding the definitions that are used, which can be quite complicated, and making the information speak to, you know, comparing apples and pears across different countries. But those are, you know, key information sources about different markets. Market intelligence providers, market research companies. So they, there are a huge number of them. Our company, the Business Research Company, is one. And they will, particularly if you're doing internet research, they produce loads of reports on different markets, saying what's going on in those markets, how big they are, how much they're growing, etc. Those reports are very expensive, so they tend to be something for when you're investing a lot of money, or you know, when you're really focused on a particular market. But you can pull up some good data from just skimming across the top of them. So if you go to an aggregator like Market Research or Research and Markets, you can get tidbits from the marketing of those reports, which can give some indications. But it can be quite hard work. So obviously, if you've got the, you know, there is a benefit with investing in these reports. I would say that, but when you're very clear about the target market that you're looking at, and you need more detailed information, but you can get top level information from the marketing of those reports. And lastly, trade journals and magazines. Pretty much every market, almost, you know, however niche, has trade magazines, and they are really good sources for getting a proper feel of what's going on in a particular market. They often have detail. Often the journalists who work on them are very, you know, spend a long time in those areas. So they really know about those areas, and they also quite often do detailed interviews with senior figures, which they write up. Of course, most of them are paid, but many of them do have an initial offering that you can get for free, something that they'll often have a search of their archive, and you can maybe get free records or something like that, a few records for nothing before you buy the journal. And even the journals are not huge, terribly expensive. They're often relatively, they're often in the sort of hundreds of dollars rather than the thousands of dollars. And they can be a very good source of really understanding a market if you're not able to do primary research. Customer identification and targeting. So here we're talking about where you're trying to understand your customer group better, or actually identify individual customers to approach or to try and market to, etc. So starting off with the first two source types there, if you're looking for essentially demographic data, there's a huge number of governmental and super governmental organizations that are that provide really loads of demographic information and loads of behavioral information, etc. Obvious examples would be things like the UN, World Bank, Eurostat, Bureau of Economics, WHO, etc. So they can be very useful. And then there are sites that pull all that data together and make it more user-friendly. The best one of those that I know of is called Knowma. So that's KNOEMA.com, and you can do searches it pulls together lots of that kind of information to help you find out more about your customers. What if your customers are certain types of companies rather than certain types of individuals? There's now a lot of company information aggregators, which will allow you to kind of do searches and narrow down to particular types of company that you could be targeting by sector or by number of employees or by loads of different filter criterias. Most of these services are paid. They generally give a certain amount you can do a certain amount for free in advance. So some of the there's craft.co is one which is good. There's Privco. There's Crunchbase, which is slightly more about the deals, etc. But there are several of them. They're useful for identifying companies that you might want to target with your services, or understanding the opportunity in terms of the number of companies for a particular service. LinkedIn is obviously the most important source when it comes to finding individual people to target and to communicate with within a B2B market. And a couple of, I think most people are pretty familiar with it. Just a few things I'll mention in terms of how to use it, which are important. One of them is join groups which are relevant to the research that you're doing. That will allow you to find more people and communicate with more people in those areas. Another is you can obviously get a premium subscription that gives you a lot more freedom in terms of your search capabilities and finding more information. And finally, there's a particular service. There are services which allow you to get more information about each person and potentially their actual contact details, which can be helpful if you're trying to reach out to people specifically, that can act as a plug-in to LinkedIn. Other types of information sources that can be useful when you're trying to find customers or trying to find new business. There are lots of projects and tenders databases. available. I think there's one called, there's a free one I think called Global Tenders, which is one of the largest in the world, and pulls together tenders from all over the world. Most countries have tenders, specific tenders databases that you can look for. Tends to be more for government work than for private work, but that can be a useful form of kind of new business research. And then associations, societies, etc., relevant to your area of research can be a great source of information. However, they tend to be designed to support their members rather than people who are researching into those markets. So it can be tough to get access to all the resources they have. But if you are able to do that, they often have very useful information about the market and lots of lists of companies in that market and even individuals within that market who potentially could be clients. Competitor information. So obviously the first place that you're going to look is on the company, the website of the company themselves or the organization themselves. Within that, I think it's most people will be familiar with the type of information that you're where you look for different types of information relating to the company. But obviously, you know, you look at the About Us page to get a grip on what the company does. You look at the vision and value statements to understand their values and strategies. Go through their products and services in detail. Investor relations for their financial information, strategy, product launches. You know, they're very often some very useful presentations to be found in the investor relations section. Contact us. Where are they? Where are they based? Hiring. So you can look at their the pages where they've got opportunities. That will give you an idea about whether they're growing or not and what areas they're growing in. Management and key employee profiles. Who have they got in their senior management? What is their background, etc. But you've got to always remember when you're looking at company websites that they are essentially marketing pieces and that they're trying to present a vision of themselves. So you need to take an objective view yourself. Annual reports and company filings are the you know, the key registrars for financial information. If the companies are private, the regulation varies a great deal between different countries in terms of how much information they have to publish. So if in some countries they have to register and with an organization such as Companies House in the UK, and there's quite a lot of information you can get. In other countries, for instance, US, there's the requirement for disclosure is much lower, and it's much harder to find out any information about private companies. In other countries, you need to get someone who's an accountant or got some kind of qualification or accreditation in that country to potentially get the information if you really need information on a private company in those countries. That's the case, for example, in India. Glassdoor is a really good way of sort of seeing behind the screen of a company. So if the company's website gives you a very marketing focused idea of what's going on in the company, Glassdoor will certainly not give you that. It gives you, it's useful on hiring, it's useful on types of people who work there, but it's also useful on understanding some of the dirty washing of the company, because there tends to be some quite forthright opinions of companies shown. So that can be a useful insight when you're trying to find out about it behind the kind of curtain of a competitor. And yeah, one particularly useful site that I've mentioned here, although like many of these sources, you know, they can be used for multiple types of research. It's not just because I've put something under competitor that you can't use it for. Sometimes it's useful for market, obviously. Company annual reports may be useful for understanding overall markets, etc. But I've just tried to organize it simply. Web archive is a way that you can look back through the history of a company and understand all about you can see their website at any given time in the past. I didn't quite manage to get onto product and pricing. I might try and cover that off in the answers to questions, but hopefully I've covered off most of the information. If anyone's got any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Hello, Oliver. Thank you so much for your presentation. We actually do have quite a few questions. One of the questions I have is, in your company, have you seen any changes in what the research people are looking for since COVID-19 arrived?
Thank you. I would say yes and no. The good news for companies like our company, the Business Research Company, is that there's continued to be quite a lot of research going on. And I think the reason for that is that everybody is running around rethinking their strategy at the moment and trying to work out what this all means. So fortunately for companies like ours, that's quite good for us. There's quite a lot of queries, quite a lot of interest. The nature of that, of the kind of queries has not changed completely, but people have tended to skew their research differently. So, for example, we've been doing a project for a big maker of industrial wipes, which are cleaners. We did one project for them just as COVID was starting to happen, and then suddenly they wanted much more information on what COVID means in relation to this, or what this means to them, because they suddenly see a huge opportunity for disinfectant wipes and you know, essentially the whole market for cleanliness, hygiene, etc., and particularly high-end hygiene for technical processes growing very rapidly. So change of emphasis, but not a complete, but not a totally different types of questions.
What about the material you find out there? Has that changed since COVID-19? Do you feel that it's quality material out there?
I think the quality of material is better. I think a lot of organizations are trying to respond quickly. I think a lot of you know, a lot of people who've been in lockdown have been producing a lot of thought pieces and a lot of content on what's going on in their industry, partially because they haven't had much else to do, and partially because things have been changing fast and it's been interesting. So for instance, we do work for a legal company, a legal media company. Law firms are churning out new information about what's going on in that market and the legal implications of COVID. So the material through free secondary research has probably never been better.
You mentioned, just to skip to something else, you mentioned an organization that aggregating macro data. Can you tell us which one that was? That
particular website was called NOMA, knoema.com. And there are others like Global Edge, which you could search for on Google, and you should be able to find, which is one which is run by an educational establishment and also has a lot of information. But NOMA is very good for pulling macro data from lots and lots of different sources.
Thank you. We also have on our Padlet, someone asked what the biggest mistake people make in research, and somebody helpfully mentioned that the biggest mistake is believing that Google search is sufficient. But is there anything else you can add to that?
Yeah, well, first of all, don't think that you can Google everything. You've got to, you've got to learn, and you've got to develop your knowledge and learn about these different repositories of information and how to find them for a specific research task. That's for secondary research. And then I would say, it hasn't been the topic of this discussion, but relying solely on secondary research is also a mistake. And one conversation with somebody who's been in a market or an area for 20 years can tell you more than days of searching in terms of really understanding what's happening. So those would be the two things, but within the boundaries of secondary research, it's just assuming, it's assuming that all you've got to do is put in the search rather than thinking of it as a two-stage process of first trying to find where the information is and then look into those repositories of information, rather than just assuming that you can take responses straight from Google and that's enough.
No, I think Google is more sort of an entryway to various websites. I know that with governments changing all the time, it can be quite difficult to find information if you go to the government website.
Yes, and they take, these different repositories of information take time and effort to learn about and learn how to use, etc. It's not an easy, immediate job, which is why it's a skill. If everybody could do it, then people like myself and many of the people I guess on the call wouldn't exist. It wouldn't be a job.
No, absolutely. I think we're about to reach 7 o'clock. So anything else you would like to say very quickly on the...
No, please do feel free to get in touch with us, the Business Research Company, and if you've got any follow-up questions, or if you want that list, you can come to us there through the portal and we'll respond, or you can send an email through SLA as well, whichever's easiest for you.
And I can mention that, I can add that as part of the COVID-19 webinars we have had here at SLA Europe, you can also find the video of this presentation on our website. So please feel free to go and have a look at our previous webinars as well. So thank you very much, Oliver. It was a pleasure having you here. I will just say enjoy the summer to all of you. Please do consider a donation to the Half Moon. And if you feel like volunteer, you are more than welcome to send us an email if you have any suggestions, ideas. And look out for our webinars in September. Please do sign up for a newsletter to stay posted. So bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.